All right, so we're recording. This is the November 20th, I believe, meeting of the SIG CMS group that we started. Basically started with Drupal to help solve some of the problems, or at least collaborate on some of the problems that people that are using Kubernetes in production are actually dealing with. So, you know, everything from file system to networking to DNS. Those are all great topics. The premise being that there's a lot of common and shared functionality and issues that we're hitting across the spectrum. And in the spirit of open source, those need to be talked about and brought to surface, brought to light, so that people can understand them and help collaborate on solving them. The company that I'm associated with that makes DDEV is particularly interested in taking those concepts and those problems and applying them to other communities as well. So, for example, we do a lot of work with the Drupal community. We do a lot of work with the Typo 3 community, and we're looking at other CMSs that ultimately will benefit from some of the learnings and some of the education that we develop as a result of solving problems for these different communities. So that's a quick introduction. Maybe we can just go ahead and kick off and have everybody introduce themselves and maybe say a little bit about who they are and why they're here. And I guess, Ricardo, you would be first up.
Okay, so my name is Ricardo Amaro. For those that don't know me, I work in Acquia since 2011. My first Linux installation was in 1994, I think. Slackware was good. Never mind. Anyway, I did my first presentation on Docker. I think it was in 2013, maybe. It was, yes, on DrupalCon. Just after. So Kevin was with me. He's to blame because he was with me in Acquia, and he started to talk about this thing called Docker, and we're like, let me. Oh God, no, this is the thing. So I started like mixing LXC with Docker and C groups, and by that time Docker was really not that useful in terms of security, and it had a lot of issues. But it was fun. We ended up using Docker as the major thing for the Drupal CI testing, which actually runs on top of that. So we have several containers. We have the base container, and then we have the MySQL container, and all of the PHP containers on top of that. After we finished that work, that was a small group. We delivered that to the DA, and now they took it over. So everything that it spun up automatically during the DrupalCon or a big sprint, and then it spuns a lot of containers so that people can just test and test and test their Drupal patches. Yeah, and now I'm turning into Kubernetes since 1 year and something. But unfortunately, the only thing I did in Acquia was messing around with it, deploying Jenkins at scale so that all the teams can use it within the AIS. And it was not directly on my team because I'm on SRE, but it's together. So we're in the same quiz team. So it's been quite fun. Okay, stop. Don't give up about me. Thank you.
Those are all, that's a great introduction. We'll just leave it at that. Thanks, Ricardo.
Thanks.
Ellie, I believe you are up next.
Chronological order today, huh?
Yes.
I know you had a system. Hi, I'm Ellie. I'm here especially to sort of help organize agenda and minutes and encourage folks to sign up for lightning talks and generally get involved. So I'm marketing and content and stuff for the most part, and also just hoping to learn a bit more in the process.
Cool. Teresa, I believe you're up next.
Hi, everyone. I'll start my video here quickly. I'm a newbie to this community. I joined DDev to lead their marketing. I think I'm approaching a month now, and so I am here to listen in and learn from the community. Hi, everyone.
Cool. And Jeff, I believe you are last but not least on the docket. Oh, we can't hear you. I can see you talking, but I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Now we can, yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, Zoom sometimes gets confused after I open up Blue Jeans. Blue Jeans confuses Zoom and vice versa. Anyway, I'm on like the last day, hopefully, of this cold that's been going on for 2 weeks. So my voice is finally somewhat back. But I used to work for Acquia, used to work with Ricardo a little bit, but now I'm working as an independent consultant with Red Hat mostly, doing a lot of work with OpenShift and Ansible. So still doing a little bit of Drupal stuff here and there. I maintain a Raspberry Pi cluster with Drupal and Kubernetes and things.
Nice.
But so tangentially still involved in Drupal Kubernetes initiatives, but it's now that I'm with Red Hat, it's gotten a lot wider, and I do things like install the evil that is WordPress and things like that from time to time.
Cool. Well, it's a small group today, so welcome everybody. We don't have any lightning talks set up, so basically figured we'd kick it off by maybe going through some of the recent events that ended up occurring and talk about some of the interest that we've gotten from different areas and some of the things that have happened at these events. One of the earlier ones just before DrupalCon was a Typo 3 Con event. And for me, you know, the Typo 3 community is very interesting. If you go through and do a composer install of Drupal, you'll see Typo 3 libraries come into core Drupal during the core Drupal install. But oddly enough, you don't see any Drupal packages going back the other way. So one of the things that I'd like to see, you know, over the long term is those two communities maybe working a little bit closer together to solve some of the PHP problems that they're having, because I think that there's a more collaborative way to do it. On the hosting side, the Typo 3 community, they have different requirements than the Drupal CMS does, because it tends to be less of an intensive installation. They do a lot of things in files, so it's more disk I/O intensive. There's a lot of read-write actions happening when they do an installation and throughout the course of their update cycles. So we got a lot of interest from the Typo 3 Association to basically start putting together kind of a collaborative discussion amongst the hosting providers that deal specifically with Typo 3, mostly in Germany, and working to define with them what the hosting paradigm should look like for their community. So what that means is, you know, setting a standard of excellence that hosting providers should attempt to achieve, being signed off on by the association to help understand that these are the hosting providers that you can work with, and then also working collaboratively with the community to help set them up for long-term success. So what that means is, you know, showing them ways of integrating some of the local development environments that are currently out there with hosting providers upstream, making that handshake a little bit more friendly back and forth to open up not only competition, but open up the ability for their developers to have more access to good quality hosting. And so far that message has been resonating. We've got a lot of interest from some of the larger hosting groups. jwyland.net is one, and the names of the others are currently escaping me, but there was a lot of interest there around solving this problem moving forward in a way that's open to the community. And I've talked quite a bit about Buildpacks in the past, but we're using that as one mechanism to be able to help enable their engineers to be able to define what their software does on something that's Dockerized essentially, or made to run containers. So that could be a local development environment or a hosting platform. So those conversations were pretty good, pretty productive, and it's a super exciting community. So I definitely encourage anybody that's interested in maybe reaching outside of Drupal a little bit to take a good look at them. Next up, we ended up having DrupalCon Amsterdam. I think DrupalCon Amsterdam was a really great event. Definitely enjoyed being there. Luckily, we've had it's a little difficult talking about Kubernetes in the space of Drupal because most Drupal engineers aren't going to pay a lot of attention to the deeper systems work that needs to happen to support Kubernetes or support Drupal, I mean, on Kubernetes. So we weren't able to get as much content as we probably wanted related to Kubernetes inside of Drupal. What we did managed to get going was a Kubernetes panel that was administered by Michael Schmidt from Amazy. He had quite a few very interesting people on there. I think Florian Loretten from Wonderkraut was there, or Wonder.
It was spun up from within the DevOps truck share, which
yes.
was me and Vinhoff. And then, we divided. So we had the other panel. You remember the DevTools?
Yeah.
And the Kubernetes one was great.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I think the panels are a really nice format. You know, the conversations that we got out of both of those panels, the local DevTools panel and the Kubernetes panel, was just amazing. Lots of good questions. Both panels were completely packed. It was standing room only and very well done. I definitely appreciate being a part of that. We had another gentleman there, Brad Jones, from a company named Fruition that's in Denver. We had Thomas, and I'm neglecting to remember Thomas's last name right now, but I believe he's from New Zealand. He was a great personality, lots of good information. Some of the questions that we went over were things like, when do you decide to implement Kubernetes? When does it actually make sense as far as a business is concerned to implement something as complex as Kubernetes? Why is it worth taking over that effort? What's the difference between managed and unmanaged Kubernetes? Do you really want to run your own clusters, or do you want to maybe go to GKE or AWS or one of the provided services out there, EKS, to manage the upgrade cycle and kind of the dependencies for Kubernetes itself? We talked a little bit about security, talked about some of the mistakes that we've made over the course of implementing Kubernetes in each of our own respective businesses. And, there's a lot that's been learned there. One of the common things I think that came up a lot was dealing with rate limits, dealing with CPU limits, making sure that you really, really understand what you're doing there. Because depending on what you're running, be it a database or a static HTML site, there's significant differences that can cost you over the long run. So very good conversations. We've got a link there inside of the meeting notes to the YouTube video of the K8s panel, and highly, highly encourage everybody to take a look at that. We also had a BOF, which I think was really, really nice. I'm not quite sure that the recording came out with a high enough quality to be useful for most people. But the conversations and the groups of people that we got together were very nice. Starting to really get the sense that there's a lot of embracement of Kubernetes in the Drupal space happening. There's a lot of people that are constrained by the existing hosting providers that are out there. In that they need to run internal systems, they need to run sovereign systems, they need to be able to have a bit more control over what they're implementing. So we're finding a trend of shops, of agencies, of larger enterprises that are starting to take on the Kubernetes challenge, starting to really appreciate what's out there, and starting to hit a lot of the challenges that this group was put together to try and solve. A lot of the questions that we had were very common ones that we have. How do you deal with files? How do you deal with databases? very, very common, very frequent questions that people have. So I think there's a real opportunity here to continue to have this conversation, to be able to get people to understand that there is a forum of like-minded people, and eventually come up with some type of best practices or ways to do things. And there's a couple of really great efforts to that in that direction. Lagoon from Amazy, they've open sourced their entire hosting platform. There's a lot of CRDs, operators, and patterns inside of their code that you can take a look at that will help get you started. We're doing a lot of stuff on our end with Buildpacks. The entire hosting system isn't quite open yet, but we did open up what we've been working on as far as Drupal and Buildpacks are concerned. And that URL's in this document as well. It's GitHub/Drud/Buildpacks. But we believe that using something like Buildpacks is going to enable different communities to be able to work in a way that they're comfortable without having to basically reinvent the wheel. And yeah, Flight Deck is a great contribution to the Kubernetes space, and I believe that Tess has that completely focused on DigitalOcean right now, which DigitalOcean's offering of Kubernetes is a managed service, and I think that they're onto a really, really nice thing there. The combination of Flight Deck and DigitalOcean seems to be really powerful. Any others that I missed that you guys have in mind or would like to recommend? We have a couple of links up on the SIG CMS site.
You're talking about the GitHub thing, right?
Yep. So Drud SIG CMS. We have one called Skipper, which is out there, and I believe that was done by Nick, and I'm not very good at his last name. But Skipper is a pretty neat hosting system. I believe it's coming out of Australia. But it looks like it's maybe designed to focus on building your containers locally and then running those in production exactly as they are. So definitely take a look at that if you get a chance. And they moved the GitHub repository, so I don't have a link that's immediately available. And I think Jeff is saying they added a hosted registry this week, which competes well with ECR. Did DigitalOcean add that, is what you're saying?
Yeah, I just got an email about it. Cool.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
I think DigitalOcean has seen probably a lot of growth. Like they're always a popular VPS provider, but I think they've been trying to grow into like hosted services, and their Kubernetes offering is pretty good and pretty simple, but they were missing a few things that, like on Amazon, it's easy to set up the whole ecosystem for Kubernetes because they had an ECR for a registry, so you don't have to manage that. And they had authentication layers and all the different types of storage and all that. And DigitalOcean seems to be slowly churning out all the different things that you need to do the same kind of turnkey Kubernetes setup without having to manage it. So they just added, I don't see it in their listing though, the registry setup. I'm not seeing it in here, but that way, instead of having to like build your own Docker registry and run it either like in a cluster or somewhere else, or some people I've seen that use DigitalOcean, they actually use an ECR registry just because it's easy to set that up, or they use something else, a hosted registry somewhere, and pay money for that. DigitalOcean's registry, I think, is a little cheaper if you're running everything in DigitalOcean.
Right. Great. I'll have to take a look at that for sure. And that also brings up the conversation of Docker in general. I don't know if everybody's been following, but Docker seems to be hitting a little bit of a tumultuous time. They have recently accepted funding and have kind of changed their business model a little bit. So I think that they're offloading most of their Docker enterprise composer type of systems work, and I'm probably slaughtering that completely, but to another company called Mirantis, which purchased that division of their company. So it sounds like Docker's starting to focus more exclusively on the local development environments. The Docker Dev Desktop seems to be kind of where they're trying to rally behind. And I think it's been a very interesting road that they're on. You know, historically, I think that they kind of made the wrong choice around 2012. I think they were approached by Google to kind of be the shepherds of Kubernetes, and at that time they were a bit of a unicorn, and came up with the idea of competing against Kubernetes, and it doesn't seem like that's working out very well for them. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have a question. So it's tangentially related to that, because I think what we're talking about here is we have a series of links, or at least ideas where to actually get some really cool information about what's going on in this sector of tech. But we don't have a centralized place to actually do that. Did we already think about the possibility or the opportunity to actually use the SIG CMS repo to actually start a series of dynamic listing for these even like news that come out, or even interesting moves or interesting tools, blog posts that we want to call attention, because you created the repo, which is great, but it's stopped, like it's now 2 months, and yeah, what about like creating like a blog post MD or resources MD or whatever, and we can actually make a series of linking outside, so can people get more interest in the repo itself? I think it
completely open to suggestions on how to facilitate that. We started some initial
attempts. Do you accept pull requests?
Most definitely, that's a great way of doing it.
then I'll make some, but let me take some notes here.
Yeah, no, I would definitely appreciate that, as well as the community would, I'm sure. The nice thing about what I was exposed to in Amsterdam was really understanding that we're all accustomed to Drupal being a global phenomenon, but Kubernetes really is, and the audience of interest is significant, and it spans all time zones. So while we have this particular one, we try to alternate them every 2 weeks to be a little more appealing to people maybe in Australia or time zones that are a bit more offset. But I think that really the success of this group is going to be related to being able to get things into a format where people can access the information at their own pace and at their own time. Definitely appreciate help there.
Yep.
Hey, I also, about the Docker situation, I put in the chat something about Podman and Builda. I don't know who's familiar with those things, but they're basically like drop-in replacements for Docker, where to the point where you can alias Docker to Podman and run Docker build and Docker whatever, and Podman will do it for you. And the reason I know about those is because over in the Fedora and Red Hat community, they've switched completely over, and they don't even have Docker in their default repositories anymore.
Interesting.
For various different reasons, but it's just an interesting thing, because
you're talking about systemd containers.
Well, it just there. That's like the container is a spec, the cryo container spec and all that, and Docker implements the spec, and Podman implements the spec, and Kubernetes just needs containers that use that spec and have a daemon that runs in the background. So it's interesting, because I think long term, I don't care if it's Docker or whatever, but the key is to make sure that you have containerized infrastructure and a good build process and all that kind of stuff. But as the years have gone on, I've been less and less optimistic on Docker in particular. Their outlook, this whole sale is interesting, because like enterprise is the only thing that I could imagine generating profits. whatever profits there were, which probably wasn't astronomical like they were hoping. And so they sold that off, and now it's like Docker, the open source stuff. And Docker, the open source stuff, like Docker Hub, there's no way that thing can make money with private repositories, because there's 500 other private repo setups that all are, I've seen in more use than Docker Hub for private registries, but they have billions of terabytes probably of public registries on there. And that's a lot of bandwidth to eat up.
I do agree with that, especially because for one project, I cannot tell what is the project internally, but we used systemd and spawn containers. And those were actually much lighter and much easier to actually work with instead of Docker. And one thing we really saw was, you've probably seen that the Docker service sometimes goes down. And the systemd service is actually really much strong in terms of that. It's much resilient in terms of failures. So in that project itself, we used that, and we were quite happy with the situation there. So yeah, so they're just going to your point. There exists some other tools, some other containers that actually do most of the same work and actually do that better. So yeah, there are options.
Yeah, we have a lot of interest in the open container initiative, which is another specification kind of in line with what Jeff was mentioning. And that for us is what we're, as long as the output's containers, we don't care what's generating it. We just need to be able to run it efficiently. And that's kind of the focus that we're starting to take as well.
Yeah, and resilience, to be honest, like, since we created SRE in Acquia, it's like the whole reliability thing. It's a major topic. Like we talk all the time about not having failures or learning from failure. And one of the things we see is like if you're pushing too much the system, like Docker sometimes does, because it's not really lightweight, we know that. It gets burned. It gets you can have hangs on the machine that are catastrophes sometimes. So having a thing like again systemd spawn or any other that can actually take or maybe even LXC that by the way Ubuntu does use a lot of LXC in Canonical uses that, and they actually keep on suggesting to use that. I was on UbuntuCon and they were like, yeah, LXC is our thing still, and it works fine. So, and that's actually much easier in terms of for a newbie to understand in terms of change root.
Right.
Yeah. I think the reliability, the resilience, and the certainty that the system can give you back is very important right now, especially when we're moving to have everything in production and want to scale up to the point that, yeah, like the customer is happy and nothing is going down. Because of that, I think there are a couple of things that fail in Kubernetes. Booming wise, like I said, Docker service going down and all of that. It's pretty much related to the way that the containerized service is built, not Kubernetes. So Kubernetes has a lot of problems, we know, but those I think are the ones that are most unexpected. They come from the lower layer. The layer that you are expecting the container to be always there, to be always running, and sometimes that's what's not happening because it just blows. Yeah.
One of the nice things from our perspective, because we are involved in some of the local development tools, is that Docker has suddenly become responsive in the issue queues. You know, as a result of these issues that are happening with them. You know, we've had complaints for the longest time about open issues with Docker that they're not responding to in any way, shape, or form. They actually care. Yeah, hopefully that keeps up. That's a good point, Jeff. We'd like to see more of that. You know, if Docker can come around and actually be a good shepherd of open source and participate in the communities, I think there's a lot of potential for them. But I'm not going to lie. I mean, we've had to already start evaluating different solutions over the long term for what some of these local development tools can do, and it'd be a real shame if we lost the momentum with solving some of the development problems that we've happened as a result of something like Docker going out of business or going away. So that should be very interesting. And Jeff dropped another link in here, cri-o.io, which seems to be a container runtime for Kubernetes as well. Definitely worth taking a look at. Yeah, so good stuff. Lots of change in the industry, lots of fun things going on. And I don't know. So Ricardo, you were at Drupal Con Amsterdam. Did you have any favorite sessions or anything that you picked up?
My favorite session was the DevTools panel.
Nice. Nice.
No, it was. Especially because there were people in the audience not understanding the rules of asking questions. No,
yeah. I noticed that.
Yeah, the panelists
very well at facilitating that, by the way.
The panelists, they were at the end saying, yeah, you did good, because we want to focus on the discussion, not really people standing up. But anyway, the discussion there was actually on the containers. That's what I'm pulling. That's why I'm pulling this in. And it was more, so I really liked the Kubernetes panel, but the DevTools panel was like going more deeper into the container thing, because what we were talking about there was everything was on Docker, right? Everything is on Docker, and right now it seems like, oh, we don't have alternatives, and there are questions coming from the audience saying, oh, how about I use what is that Windows saying, WLC2, I think that's the name of it. And that actually goes and puts a layer on top of their kernel that tries to figure out the ways that the Linux kernel works, and then running the container from that. That actually is not that bad, but it raises other problems, right? If they're doing that, which is not like deleting the NT kernel forever and just using a Linux kernel, if they're going that way. Anyway, the problem there in that discussion is, we still need to figure out, as we're talking here, we still need to figure out what are the options and what are the best solutions that for developers work on the Mac, works on Windows, works on Linux, and whatever opens or whatever system we're talking about. And that's a difficult answer, especially because I don't know what you guys think about this, but when I ask Docker, and I've seen that claim on the Docker issues, saying, "Oh, Docker doesn't work correctly on the Mac." Well, the Mac kernel doesn't support what the Linux kernel supports to be able to actually, like have user spaces and have all the things that come from Solaris already in the past. They were basically, it was knowledge that was moved to Linux, right? And this knowledge that was moved to Linux, I think Apple doesn't care about if their kernel is going to support those kind of things, right? They're not, it's not their target, right? So, asking Docker when they're going to fix it for a Mac, it's like saying, oh, how do you go about changing that kernel that it's not your own thing, and then putting it back on our, we cannot do that. That's not possible unless they could actually contribute to that. And I don't think Apple is going to do that. Be able to what other solution could happen? Nothing, right?
Well, I mean, ultimately, it's going to involve communication with Apple, and I don't know
Yes.
the steps
Yes.
that they've taken to facilitate that or what they've done to enable that, but it definitely is going to take some
Changing
change.
the Mac kernel,
Yeah, I mean,
like
no
like
small
like
task,
Windows.
right?
Basically, what Microsoft is doing. Basically.
Well, there's a lot of people that are saying now that, you know, it's just a matter of time until we're all using Windows machines instead of Macs, because, you know, I'm hearing rumors that the new Windows builds are actually run on Linux kernels, and they're testing that. So in the next couple of years, it should move to more of a Linux-based kernel than an NT-based kernel, which
Yeah.
I find very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Microsoft's a smart company, you know, they've got their
Oh, they
eyes
are. Yes.
where they need to be. So hopefully Matt catches up, but you know, I just developers. It works, you know. You appeal to the developer, and you appeal to just a world of influence as a result of that. I think that you know, the developers, we've changed the world with the internet, and we're continuing to do it. So the more that you can empower the developer, the better off everyone's going to be. Hopefully Apple catches up with that lesson. Hopefully Docker has the ability to help resolve some of these problems. Hopefully they don't just disappear, because I know that we'd like to help support them and keep them around too, because they did make, you know, LXC more approachable to the masses essentially. And for me, that's what Docker really did. So hopefully they can turn that into something useful. Cool. So just moving along with the agenda, you know, KubeCon's happening now. It's in San Diego. I definitely wish that I would have been able to attend, but I have not been able to. So we have a link to the live stream in the documents for anybody that's interested in checking that out. KubeCons are absolutely amazing. The community around Kubernetes is fantastic. You know, I don't know if anybody has had the opportunity of attending one, but if you do get the chance, definitely go. The way that the community is organized, the way that they solve problems, the governance model that's in place, the entire interrelationship between, you know, getting things done and delivering a product in an open way is taken to an entirely different level in Kubernetes, and I really appreciate the professionalism associated with that. It feels like they had the opportunity to learn from previous open source projects and communities and really try and move things forward. And I think they're doing a fantastic job. Another thing that's really nice to note is that Helm 3 is actually out there now for people to start using and playing with. We've seen some pretty good results so far from poking at it. We're a little hesitant to embrace it completely because of some of the pain that we've gone through with previous versions of Helm. But I hear really good things. Has anybody on the call heard anything? No. Well, if you have the opportunity, definitely check it out. I know that that's moving along pretty well. And one thing that I am going to mention is I believe next call we will have an actual lightning talk lined up, getting a little bit more formalized about lining these up in advance. So I think that there's going to be some additional content that people are going to be able to get out of these, which I think is good. And I guess next we're on to, you know, recent challenges or celebrations that people would like to share. What problems are you working on? Can we help give feedback on projects or upstream projects? For us, I think really focusing on our CI/CD pipelines has been kind of where we're paying a lot of attention right now. We're doing a lot of work with Argos CD, which I think has been pretty useful. Have worked with a couple of different providers to help from more of a Kubernetes native space, and Argo seems to be coming out pretty well. See you later, Jeff.
Bye, Jeff.
Yeah, so that's been a good one for us. Really getting nailed into some of the testing that needs to happen to validate the system, and we're finding that testing Kubernetes itself is pretty hard. So going and stepping back to more of user kind of behavior-driven testing through the CLIs that we expose to customers, we find is kind of a good way of going about and testing the entire system without having to write really deep integration tests. So I've been spending a lot of time there. Yeah, that's basically all that I have. I don't suppose you have anything, Ricardo?
Yeah, I dropped in just to see what you guys are doing. I think it's amazing. It's really amazing what's going on here. I have questions, but it's about DDAV itself. So it's not the right place to ask you, but I'll ask you later.
Sure.
Another maybe one chat or slide or something.
We'll have you answer those. We'll take them offline.
Cool. So I do want to say it was really good to have you on the Kubernetes panel and to have Randy Fay on the DevTools panel, because you guys are doing a great job. Like Truth is, well, it's carrying a flag. A few other companies may do right now, but it needs to be carried. It needs to be moved forward, and the result is like this meeting and some other things like setting up the repo. I do hope we bring more people in. I'm going to talk about this in places that I know. We're going to have a Drupal day on Friday here. It's sold out.
Cool.
And I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to do a presentation there, and I'm going to talk about this, making a small pitch, 1 minute or two, because we need to get more people involved, and that's the way to do this kind of achievement.
Right. And we're doing spending a lot of time focusing on BadCamp as well next year. So we're going to look at some fresh, a bit of a fresh perspective on the DevOps track for BadCamp. So any ideas people might have to help us kind of move this conversation forward with that forum would be greatly appreciated as well.
Okay.
Cool. Well, as far as next steps, looking forward to pull requests from Ricardo. No pressure there.
Okay. No pressure.
But like I said, we will be doing a little bit more work to get more formal about some of the lightning talks. We're going to reach out to some non-Drupal people specifically and get some deeper understanding of Kubernetes itself. So look forward to that in the next meeting. And outside of that, I guess that's it. Thank you for your time. Thank you for attending, and we'll go ahead and put this up on YouTube so that those that weren't able to attend have the opportunity.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.